Did you know that the actor Brad Pitt, in every movie he is in, is eating in at least one of the scenes of the movie? If you haven't noticed this before, you can notice this now. In over 60 movies that Brad Pitt has been in, his character is always eating. He says that he does this because it helps him getting into the role of that character. For instance, in the character he played in Ocean's 11, this guy's always on the run, and so he's always eating a hasty snack in every scene. And if his character happens to be rich or poor, he eats the food that a rich or a poor person might eat. And he also said that he likes to eat in movies because it makes his character more relatable, because it's something we all do. And here is a fun fact. The more scenes of a movie where Brad Pitt is eating makes more money at the box office than his other movies. And the more scenes where he's eating, the higher the score he gets on Rotten Tomatoes. So, eating is important to Brad Pitt. But we're not here about Brad Pitt. Eating is also important to Jesus. One biblical scholar, Robert Karras, said that Jesus was killed because of the way he ate. Now, this doesn't have to do with what Jesus was eating, but it's who Jesus chose to eat with and the situations that Jesus chose to place himself into. As we learn about Jesus through the gospel books of the Bible, we see that important things happen when people share a meal with him. There are conflicts that bubble up. There's healing connection that happens. There's holy moments. There's clashes of class and culture. Mixed motives of people come to light, and there's awkward family interaction. These things are all happening in the scene that I shared with you from John's gospel. And to be honest, I had always passed over this moment of Jesus' life because it happens between two more important events in his life. So right before this dinner, Jesus raises his friend Lazarus from the dead. And right after this dinner, Jesus goes to Jerusalem where he will face his own death. And yet it's in this meal where these extravagant gestures and the mixed motives and the clash of beliefs boils up and leads to Jesus getting killed. I guess you could say Jesus was killed because of the way he ate. Welcome to our November sermon series, Dinner with Jesus. We anticipate that many of us in coming weeks or months will be sharing meals with people we don't normally share meals with. And this may be a surprise to you, but it brings some tension and awkwardness to some families. If you throw into that mix conversation about politics or social issues, I think we have a recipe for plenty of awkward family meals. And this month, we want to focus on how Jesus shows up, how Jesus is with us in these meals. And I thought we could start off by getting into the heads of the people who are at this dinner party with Jesus in John chapter 12. So let's look at the main characters. We have Lazarus, Mary, Martha, and Judas. Oh my. So let's look at Lazarus first. Lazarus is the person that Jesus raised from the dead. And I would say this is Jesus' biggest miracle recorded in the Gospels, because Lazarus wasn't just almost dead or freshly dead. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days by the time Jesus got there. His family had already held his funeral, and he was already put into a tomb by the time Jesus got there. Imagine if you're Lazarus, and the only thing you know when you come to is that things are really stiff and you smell real bad. Imagine, what does that mean for you? As Lazarus, you've literally been given a second lease on life. What does that mean for who you are and what your purpose is and what you're supposed to be doing with the rest of this new life that you've been given? And here he is, having dinner with Jesus, who had raised him from the dead. Then we have Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, and we hear about them a few times throughout the Gospels. But Martha is a no-nonsense hard worker. She knows how to put on a dinner. She knows how to get things arranged. And we have Mary, who is much more wears her emotions on her sleeve and gets taken in the moment by whatever emotion she has. Just a chapter before this, after Lazarus had died, Mary is weeping. She's inconsolable. It's day 4 after Lazarus has died, and she's still weeping. And Jesus finally comes. And Jesus is so moved by Mary's weeping that he also starts to weep. It's the shortest verse in the Bible for any of you who wanted to memorize the shortest verse in the Bible. It says, Jesus wept. But that was in response to Mary's show of emotion. And Mary says to Jesus in that moment, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's a beautiful thing that she does. She expresses faith in Jesus. She knows he has power, but she's also angry with him for not showing up when she needed him. It's a beautiful thing because I think a lot of us have struggles with expressing both faith and anger at God. And Mary holds those things together. She could be angry and still have faith. And then now we have this dinner party. And Martha is again in the kitchen putting together a meal. And again, she's looking for, where's Mary? Why isn't she helping me? And all of a sudden, she smells this really fragrant perfume coming from the living room. Now, this is an awkward thing for many reasons. First, it's in the middle of dinner. Second, this perfume Mary uses is such a rare and expensive perfume. It cost a whole year's wages for this bottle. And she uses it all on Jesus' feet. And it's also a very strange and intimate gesture that she took her hair and dried Jesus' feet. And then also in the midst of this dinner party is Judas Iscariot. Now, Judas is the disciple we don't talk about a lot because he's the one who openly went behind Jesus' back to betray him. And we hear Judas chastising Mary for using this perfume to anoint Jesus' feet. And we only hear Judas speaking for himself one other time in the Gospels. We hear him on the night when Jesus shared that last meal with his disciples. And Jesus says, one of you will betray me. And Lazarus says, it's not I, is it? And Jesus says, if you say so. But this is the only time we hear Judas speak. And I wonder what's inside Judas's head. I mean, he's already working with officials to get Jesus killed. And yet he's witnessed this miracle of Jesus raising someone from the dead. How is he operating, knowing all of these things are happening at the same time? And then the dinner party gets interesting, because not only are these main characters there, but it says a great group of the Jews start trickling in because they learn that Jesus is having dinner at Lazarus' house. Now, all these people are interested because they had been at Lazarus' funeral. They had walked in the funeral procession to Lazarus' tomb. They had seen him be laid to rest. And now they hear Lazarus is back from the dead and Jesus is having dinner with him. And it causes all sorts of emotions and belief to happen. All of these people who were merely interested in Jesus before start to believe in him, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God. But then there's others in the group who are angry with what Jesus has been doing, and they don't want things to change, and they like the power structure as it is, and they want Jesus dead. And not only that, they want Lazarus dead too, because Lazarus is walking around as a human testimony of the power of God. Now, I want to make a side note here. Throughout John's gospel, it talks about the Jews coming to get Jesus and the Jews thinking this. And it makes it seem like it's a fight between Jews and non-Jews. But John's gospel was written later than all the other gospel books, and it had given people enough time to separate into factions. But in Jesus' day, he was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. The people he was arguing with were Jewish. And it isn't more about Jewish versus non-Jewish, but it's about power and people who had it and people who didn't. But when we read the way John's gospel is written, it seems like Jewish people as a whole are bad and need to be blamed. And that has led to terrible discrimination against Jewish people over the centuries. So there's a lot happening at this dinner party with Jesus. So we ask the question, where is Jesus in all of this? Jesus is right there in the middle of it. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to believe in Jesus, I need Jesus to be a savior who isn't afraid to show up in the most tense or awkward moments. If I'm like Martha and I'm trying to orchestrate a dinner party and make things work well, I need to know that Jesus is going to show up in the midst of the most awkward dinner arrangements. If I'm like Lazarus, I need to know Jesus is going to show up in those moments where I don't know who I am anymore, and I have questions about my identity. If I'm Mary, I need to know that Jesus is going to show up during my moments where I get carried away with my emotions and my gestures. And if I'm like Judas, I need to know that Jesus is going to show up in those moments where I am plotting and selfish and misguided and preparing to betray someone. And for all of us, when I'm grieving, I need to know that Jesus is going to show up and that Jesus can handle both my faith and my anger, or the lack of faith that I have. I need to know my Savior can show up in those moments. Today, after later on in our service, we're going to have a recognition of All Saints' Day, which was November 1st. And that's where we say the names of people who have been baptized in the last year and people who have completed their baptismal journey, who have died and are at home in Jesus' care. And we just say the names of people who are connected to our church family, but I know that a lot of you carry with you names of other people who have died, who have made an impact on your life. And I know that there's people here today who have tender hearts and their grief is fresh. And I know that there's people here who have regrets or complicated feelings about the people who have died in their lives. And there's people here who don't know who they are anymore now that this person has died, and they've got to start all over. There's a lot of emotions and complexity in this room right now. And you know where Jesus is? He's right here. He's right in the middle of this room. He doesn't leave us alone in our despair. In fact, Jesus invites us when we gather for worship. Most of the time we are invited into a meal where we're given forgiveness and there's healing and there's grace, and we call that meal communion. Now, in some churches, communion is practiced where you kneel around a half circle. Has anybody been a part of a church where, maybe been to an older architecture church where they have communion in that half circle? Well, the reason it's built that way is so that you can see with eyes of faith the rest of the circle being filled in by the saints who have already died and those who are yet to be born. And it completes a circle which is a big family meal where God is present, where Jesus is the host of the meal, where Jesus presides and welcomes all, where Jesus is the Savior of the living and the dead. Now, no matter the shape of the table or the method of serving, Jesus is present, and Jesus is in the center of it. And it's a beautiful dinner party where awkwardness and complexity and grief are welcomed, and where Jesus promises to be with us, promises to strengthen us, to forgive us, and to help us keep showing up for each other as Jesus has called us to do. So welcome to November, to Dinner with Jesus.